My name is Diana Lopez, and this is Medusa's Awakening Podcast. Trigger warning. This episode might address sensitive subjects that may be distressing for some listeners. Topics discussed include violence, sexual violence, childhood abuse, mental health issues, and substance abuse. Please be mindful of your own well-being while listening. If you find these topics triggering or difficult, seek support from a mental health professional or a trusted individual. We thank you for listening. Hello, everyone. So today's episode is special because the Medusa's Awakening podcast is joining a podcastathon where we highlight a nonprofit we support. Now, for some of you who have listened from the start of this podcast, first of all, I want to thank you for your continued support. And I'm sure that this won't be a surprise for you that we are highlighting a nonprofit that I founded called the Medusa Project Incorporated, located here in the Bay Area. And to help me with this episode, I have here Aria Babow, the Medusa Project's Chief Officer of Education. In this role, Aria is responsible for everything towards educating our youth and our communities. Aria is also an anti-trafficking consultant and advocate. She spends her time educating youth in schools about trafficking. Hello, Aria, and thank you for joining us here today.
Oh my God, it's so nice to be here instead of just listening to it and hearing about it.
Well, I appreciate you listening as well. So Aria and I met while working with the San Francisco Collaborative Against Human Trafficking. So that's also known as SFCAT. So throughout the podcast, if I mention SFCAT, that's what I'm referring to. And we have literally been tied at the hip ever since. But for the listeners that don't know, what drove you to SFCAT and the work that you're currently doing in the schools?
I first heard about SF when I was promoting a short film that I'd made with a friend of mine about trafficking. It was actually based on my own story, and I was interested in getting it out and doing education and showing it in schools. And been to an SF conference a year or so
Okay.
prior, and or maybe it was about that time. I don't know. The lines are blurry. Um,
Yeah, I get
but
it. I
but I
get it.
but I'd been to a conference, and yeah, I guess it had been about the time we did the film because I was talking about it there.
Oh, wow.
And
Okay.
one of the chair members, Benita Hopkins, had met me there and was talking with me about my work and, well, the team poster contest that they did, since it was only the team
Right.
poster contest at the time.
Hmm.
And we were actually invited to come and speak at the team poster contest and kind of just talk about our film and advocacy and everything. So I started getting involved then, and then I was going to every conference, and I was involved with the poster writing and music contest and everything. And eventually, I learned actually through Benita that they were opening positions for a hotline.
Oh, nice. Yeah.
And then I got in touch with Antonia, and next thing I knew, I had the job. And then I met you, and the
Right.
rest is history.
Yeah, exactly. And like, how old were you when you first, like when you did the film and started working with, collaborating with the SFCAT?
I mean, I guess I was 2021,
Oh, okay. Yeah.
2021, somewhere in there.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's been a while.
Yeah, and so yeah, it has been, yeah, it's been a few years for me, but it's been even longer for you. And you are the ones who, are kind of like showing me the ropes too. So like things that I'm learning is through learning through experiences from people just like you with lived experiences. Um so it's been, yeah, it's been such an amazing journey getting to know you and all the work that you're doing, especially in the schools. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so it actually started with that film that I was working on.
Hmm.
I wanted to start bringing it to some of the schools in my hometown, which just kind of wanted to see how it would work. So we kind of got into contact with teachers that we knew, to see maybe if we could screen it, and do a presentation. So I started doing that. And then even after that first year, people kind of moved on, but I ended up doing it for years. I would just call and make my appointments, basically to do the presentations for each semester. And I come in and do a PowerPoint and show the film and just, describe what my experience had been with trafficking and basically why I wanted to do education. Because at the time, trafficking education in California had just been mandated, and there weren't a lot of materials, and the schools didn't really have any money to be able to get curriculum, let alone anyone who was coming in to teach about it. And then just throughout the years, it's been evolving and changing as I've gained new information. I actually stopped showing that film and started showing another one. And now it's just, a presentation that I built and adapt every single semester based on the audiences that I speak to. And it's one of the most rewarding things. I always say that those are some of my favorite days going in and talking with these kids.
Now,
They're so open
oh,
and
that's
excited
good.
to learn. And it reminds me why I love being in the classroom and why I like educating.
So what grades do you usually go in, or is it kind of mixed?
So usually when we first started, the classes were sometimes mixed. It's really due to the schools and how they structure
Oh,
the
okay.
classes that we go into. But usually now it's typically ninth grade, so freshmen um
Okay.
who are getting sex ed,
Got
because that's
it.
kind of where the class fits in, at least in high schools.
Right.
So,
Right.
you know, I, I end up going in towards the end of the semesters, and they've already learned about lots of different topics. Um, and I try and give them, the education I wish I could have gotten when I was in those classes. And of course, I remember that when I was taking HI or, sex ed or whatever it was,
Mhm.
for these kids, we didn't have those mandates.
Right.
So there wasn't any education around this. But I try and think about what I would have liked to see then and how I can relate to them, which is
Right.
definitely more challenging now that I am further away from their age than I was when I first started presenting.
You're not that old. But I get what you mean because so in California the mandate is human trafficking is taught in grades 7 through 12. But when you go into a ninth grade class, are you seeing students going, what are you talking about? Or are you seeing students that kind of get or understand what trafficking is?
I get a mix.
Okay.
By the point I go in, they've already heard some about it from their teachers.
Got it.
Sometimes they've seen some films, they've heard something already. So it's not usually the first time they've heard about trafficking, but it's
Hmm.
the first time they really get an in-depth view. Um, they
Oh,
usually
okay.
start some of the classes that I go into watch a film called Sold, which is based on a book by Patricia McCormick.
Okay.
Um, and it's about a young girl in Nepal who's trafficked in India, and it's a great book. It's one of my favorites.
Oh,
Um,
okay.
and so they've started using that, to talk about some different kind, trafficking and just as a good visual. And I really love the book and the movie. But I think it makes a huge difference when you see someone in front of you who's been
Right.
through something,
Hmm.
and you can relate to them and ask them questions. It just makes it a lot more real than watching a movie.
Yeah, that's true. And I think you mentioned earlier on like the education you wish you would have had because oftentimes the story is or the what we're hearing is they don't people don't realize that that's what it is when they're
Oh
in
no,
it. It's not
no.
until after somebody's had to explain it to them. Was that the situation for you?
Yes, it was. I had no idea what trafficking was until I went to that SFCAT conference. Um, I mean, I kind of had an idea about what it was, but
Hmm.
I'd never heard any research about it. I hadn't gone, into any kind of depths to learn like what it looked like outside of my own experience. And my own experience, I didn't know it was trafficking. That wasn't how I thought about it. Um,
Right. And you
until
didn't
my eyes were
know.
opened.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And you weren't aware of kind of the things traffickers often say um to get you, or to manipulate you in that way. Um,
no,
and oftentimes, like, and that is probably not currently, I mean, I know like human trafficking materials were like talking about what it is, what it looks like, things like that. But I think, do you feel like more can be done as far as speaking about, how traffickers use manipulation and what types of manipulation they might use and the things that they might say, like that kind of thing?
definitely.
Yeah.
I think because every person's situation is different. So
Hmm.
there's lots of different examples I can give, about like peers or, someone acting as a romantic interest, or, you know, gangs or other, there's so many examples I can use and I can give ideas of language and things they might say or situations that might lead to trafficking, but ultimately
Right.
every person's is different. And
True.
whenever I speak, and start speaking about my experience, you know I don't usually see it when I'm talking with people, or if I'm watching something that has to do with trafficking. I see parts of it, but not the whole thing. So
Right.
I think
Mhm.
it can be difficult if your situation doesn't fall into any prescribed category,
That makes
and
sense.
or
Yeah.
and the things people say, it changes. I'm sure that the things that they would use to entice teenagers now are completely different than what they might have used. I mean, not completely, but definitely different than what they would have used with me.
Yeah.
um
I
you know
have a feeling that it's probably evolved into something more mainstream now, right? Like, well, like what we were hearing from some of the Epstein survivors was, like how they got their friends to do it because, it was just, oh, we're just giving massages, right? I think that's what um sometimes that's how friends can involve other friends, or how people can probably, how traffickers use their current victims to manipulate other to come in and be involved in that as well.
I mean,
Um,
like for me, I felt like they were always trying to sell some sort of dream or idea.
mhm.
Like in the movie Sold, the girl's going to go be a maid, in a
Oh,
home and be able to send home money, to her family. For me, it's like we were watching. I try and think about like what was I interested in at that time. Like one of the things that I loved watching, totally toxic now that we realize it is, is like Next Top Model. That was what we
right.
watched, and I like
Oh, yeah.
was
Yeah.
obsessed with the idea of being a model. Um, now when I listen and hear what kids want to be, and when I ask them, like, what do you want to be? They're like, oh, I want to be an influencer.
Yep.
I want to
Yep.
be a YouTuber or whatever. And I'm like, that is completely different. I mean, not that there weren't kids who didn't want to do that, but it was a lot more specialized, I feel like.
Yeah,
Um,
definitely. Because,
and
right, they
that
lure them
wasn't
in
something
with
we
the
necessarily,
travel.
yeah, but it wasn't
Yeah.
something that we aspired to be. It's like we watched YouTubers, but I didn't know very many people who wanted to be one. It was more about like streaming things and um, like because we posted on Instagram and Facebook, but there wasn't the same kind of social media culture that there is now. And that's what I hear more often than not, you know, um,
Yeah.
as like
Hmm.
kind of that teen dream, you know, of a job. So
Right.
I think that the lures are a little different, which, makes the language and the manipulation a little different as well, but same basis.
Right. Yeah. Like being a brand ambassador, but here you can travel, and we can get you to, Instagram photos for, that you can get more fans, and all this stuff like
Yeah.
that. And it's like, man, it's they really know how to manipulate. It's just, it's insane to me because, people often think that it's easy to walk away from things like that, like, oh, I wouldn't be, I'm smarter than that, I wouldn't, fall for something like that. It's like, you don't understand, like, it's not necessarily just about like, oh, getting fame and fortune either. It's also about just those who are vulnerable, right? Like needing a place to
Yeah.
stay, needing money, like in that movie Sold, like you said, like being able to send money home, you know?
Just needing
Um,
money, needing love, needing
yeah,
affection. I mean, all of those things make you really vulnerable. And that's what I try and explain to the kids is that, just because they're watching these films and, like Sold set in, a country that's not the US, with different, disadvantages, obviously they're dealing with more poverty.
right, true.
This girl is having, there's a lack of like compulsory education where she is, all
Yep.
these different things that might keep you on a path. I'm not saying that education necessarily has to be everyone's path, but you know what I mean. Um,
Yeah. Well,
that
like,
that
in
it's
most of the
very,
remote areas, you're not getting the understanding that there is trafficking out there
yeah.
until you leave your little, community. It and then you find yourself in a big city somewhere under the guidance of somebody who's now let your visa run out and tells you that, everybody is, don't talk to anybody, everybody's a danger, except for me, like the brainwashing is just insane. And it
I mean, I
happens.
think,
Go
yeah.
ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
Uh, I was just gonna say, I mean, I think that it's similar manipulation here.
Right.
Um, but it's different. You're going to
Yeah.
have some different situations, and we're lucky we've got a lot of different advantages here, and
Yeah. It's true.
and and but ultimately I think the manipulation factors end up remaining relatively the same. Um,
Yeah, I
it's
mean
just
you're
slightly
taking
different tactics.
Yeah, you're taking somebody who's going, you just highlighted a need I've been dying for or an opportunity I've been dying for. And now I'm like all in, like, oh my gosh, somebody's actually handing me this opportunity. Like, why wouldn't I take it?
Yeah.
Like there was this documentary called I think it's called BS High, and it was about some man who started a football team based on a school that didn't actually exist. And through this, right? So what's the vulnerability? You're getting these kids who would not really have an opportunity to join like a college team or an NFL team, right? That is looking for stardom, that's wanting to like that's what their soul is asking, begging for, right? A chance to play professionally on a team. And so what he wound up doing, like he even got so far as like putting them in this championship that, they completely like got wiped out in. It was even broadcasted, I think, like on one of the ESPN channels. And they were
Wow.
like, what is this? Like, they act like they haven't played before. And what he ultimately wanted up doing is like putting them all in these hotel rooms where they really weren't getting food. He had them like sign up for loans and stuff or something like that under their social security number, but he was getting all the money. And so, and then it just turns out that this, program was fake. And, now they owed a bunch of money based on their social security. So in a way that's, that's a form of trafficking. And that
Yeah.
it just, like you said, it looks so different um these days. So there's vulnerabilities there for men, just as much there is for women. And I don't think a lot of people know that or understand that. And yeah, it can literally happen to anybody. And I think that's what people don't necessarily understand is everybody has a vulnerability that somebody can prey on. I think that's why, a lot of the elderly get scammed a lot, right? Um,
Yeah.
and even those people who, scammers that are some of them have even been identified as trafficking victims because they were held in those places and they were forced to scam people in the US or scam people in different other countries. So that's also like another type of trafficking. But the thing is, people are not hearing about it or not understanding it is because nobody's really teaching that, or identifying that, I guess, until, lo and behold, then you find yourself in some stuff. Um, so I think that leads us to like, this is why we joined forces with the Medusa Project and what our current goal is, which is we want to raise enough money in order to start an anti-human trafficking campaign in all the schools, starting here within the Bay Area and then expanding throughout the state and then expanding nationwide. Um, because I think you touched on a variety of different things, which is nobody understands what this scam, this manipulation is happening until it's too late. And so we want to
Yeah.
make, we talked about this, right? Posters everywhere, all throughout the school, identifying how it looks, maybe even identifying what traffickers might say or how they use vulnerabilities, pamphlets on resources, how to get help. And we were all that age, that Tay youth, that transitional age youth, right? That probably, what is that, 14 through 21, 22, something like that.
Yeah.
Where we thought nothing's ever bad. It's going to happen to us. We can, whatever, right? But but what we're trying to say is cool. If you really think that, I get it because I thought that too. I was invincible. But what if it's a family member, a brother or sister or cousin? What if it's, your mom and dad? Like, what if it's something that you realize that might be going on with your friend, somebody that you truly love? Um, so it's important for everybody to know this. And I think the other piece to that is, um, we talked about also, doing some type of presentation with the parents at schools so
Oh
that
yeah.
they also know, right? Because that's super important. Because I think we've been told a few times from different schools, it's not necessarily the schools that don't want us in, it's the parents.
That's
And
pretty true. I mean, I think that when I've done presentations, especially when I've done it and there have been parents around, I've done a couple, with uh, you know, PTAs or parents involved from school districts, and they can have a hard time swallowing it. And it's partially due to the fact I think that you don't really want to think about that happening to your kid.
right.
Um, and not going to get into huge politics here, but there can be biases around what people think trafficking looks like, what people think trafficking is, and um, you know, as adults, we've learned lots of different things, had lots of different experiences about the world. And with kids,
Yeah,
you look at trafficking, and every time I talk to them, they're like, "This is bad. Why wouldn't we teach about this? Why wouldn't people be upset about this?" They're not
right.
surprised by it. With adults, sometimes it is a harder sell.
Yeah, it's
um,
really interesting. And yeah, I still can't really pinpoint why. I don't know if it's I don't want you to scare my kid, that type of
there's
thing.
some of that. There's definitely some of the I don't want to scare my kid, or it's not going to happen to my kid, or what if you know, what if it's something, what if they're not going to, what if they had an experience, they don't want to talk about it. I don't know
Yeah.
what goes in your head. I think there's a lot of, I'm afraid you're going to scare my kid, and, you know, then they're going to have nightmares or whatever. Um,
Yeah.
but to me, the worst part about that is that if their kid ends up being in a situation where they're being exploited,
Right.
they might not know that that's happening. They might not know that, they might have been able to avoid being in that situation by having the knowledge of what trafficking looks like. You know,
Right.
um, Not that
Right.
that's a guarantee every time, but
Well, and I think the stigma is a lot of people have a lot of misinformation about what trafficking looks like. People think that you're chained in some basement somewhere 24 hours a day, so you go missing, and that, oh, my child's missing, so that's the factor, right? As opposed
yeah,
to your child could be going home every single day and not telling you,
yeah,
right? So, yeah, I think that's the huge part is the misinformation. And I think the other thing is like, parents need to understand that they just cannot, and no matter, like, I want to do it too, right? Like, no matter how much we want to keep our children safe, it's like you go to school and you come straight home. Like, what kind of life is that for anybody? Like, the idea of not telling your kid about things in order to protect them is I'll just keep them in a bubble. And then what happens when they're, what, 19, 20, they're playing video games and then somebody's soliciting them or somebody's trying to get them to be trafficked through the video games, through computers, through social media. No matter how much you try to protect your child by maintaining parent controls or checking their chats or doing this, what happens when they grow up and move out? They still can be vulnerable to this. Like it doesn't stop just because, okay, well, they're at the age of 25. I don't have to look through their stuff anymore. So then what happens after that? They still don't have the education on what to look out for when they get older, because there are plenty of victims of trafficking that they don't tend to be trafficked into their 20s and 30s, um, because they were never taught that same
Well, and
thing.
it's also just perfect storm of events. I mean,
Right.
you can, I would say, I will say you can know everything, or as much as you can prepare yourself all you can, and learn about trafficking and, learn about the signs, and you still might be caught off guard. Um,
True. Mhm.
because it's not a perfect science.
Yeah.
And traffickers are very, very good at being crafty and
Yeah,
figuring
they
out
are.
who's vulnerable and, you know, pinpointing that person and targeting them, and their weaknesses and their needs and their wants and their desires. So, I mean, that's the other hard part, and I think that also part of being a teenager, you start thinking that you're invincible.
Yeah.
Nothing's gonna hurt you. Your parents are saying things, that are crazy, like, why are my parents whining about this? This is never
Yeah.
gonna happen to me. And
True.
I've definitely had when I've told people what I do, and that I go in school and I talk about trafficking, I was trafficked. Um, I've had parents go, see, if they're with their kids, see that does happen. It's a real thing. They don't seem to think it's a real thing. Um, and the
Yeah.
kids just kind of look at you like, look at my mom being all dramatic again, my dad being all dramatic. Um, and I get it, you tend to you don't want to think it's gonna happen to you, and there, hopefully it won't.
Right. Yeah.
But it doesn't mean you can't be vulnerable.
Right.
Um, but sometimes that can be very difficult to get across, because the things that we think of as being unsafe things may not seem unsafe, you
Yeah.
know.
Right. That's true. And everybody, at that age is so I know better anyways, right?
I definitely was.
Yeah.
Definitely
I
had that
mean,
attitude.
yeah. I mean, I also had that attitude. It's just like, you can't tell me nothing. You don't know anything about, what actually happens out there, because yeah, we just know it all.
Yeah.
But I think, for the listeners, the idea is the Medusa Project wants to empower the youth in our community through this education and give them access to people that can help them. You know, like I said, if it's not them, then maybe a friend or even a family member. But have just look, it's great that if it never happens to you, that's the plan, right? That's that's where we're trying to go with this, is to minimize the events from happening. And but we can't do that unless we educate. And I know the Medusa Projects is going to have such great education because of Aria, and it's just going to be really important for this campaign to take off. And like I said, it's got to be something big that, like we did, for those of us that went to high school in the 80s, with the Dare and Just Say No campaigns. Like, that's the extent of the campaign. That's how big and widespread we want it to be. So not just confined to a health class, but where you could see posters walking down the hallways. And we also want that education, right? Keep doing the education in the health class and maybe do some assemblies and big community events. So, that's kind of where we're headed. And so for those of you listening, we would really appreciate your support. And we will have links to a bunch of the things that we talked about here in the description of the podcast. And Aria, is there anything else you want to say?
No, I'm just really happy that I get to be here with you, and I'm excited that we get to share what the Medusa Project's doing. When I said one of my favorite things is going into these classrooms and speaking with kids, and one of my philosophies is that by better educating our youth, and explaining to them what exploitation looks like, how they factor into, not just potentially being exploited themselves, but products that are made by exploitation, supply chains, and just being conscious, conscious individuals, conscious consumers, and everything. That's one of the ways, small ways that they can do something, stop trafficking. If they see something that looks like someone might be trafficked, and tell someone, that's a way of helping by just using their education, by going home after the presentation, telling their families, telling their friends, talking about it, being aware of what the signs are. All those things help them be more safe. Um, and that's a way that they can help contribute to anti-trafficking and helping people, who've been trafficked. They don't have to go all, out and be advocates. They don't have to do, all the things that I wanted to do in high school, like, join a club or go help out, like, the SFCAT has, a teen committee things, they don't have, if they feel called to do that, that's great, but
Mhm.
just by being educated, they're doing something, to help and bring more awareness about trafficking, and I try and stress that because, education is one of the best ways we can combat trafficking and the dangers. So
That's
yeah, I mean, like I said,
beautiful.
I'm just really happy to be here, and I'm happy that we met and we're able to do all this together, and I'm just excited for whatever the future holds.
Me too. I'm excited to get this campaign off the ground once we can get funded and start really doing the work because man, I can't wait. I can't wait to see how this all plays out for us. So thank you so much for coming on here and doing an episode with me. I really
Oh,
appreciate
thank
you.
you. I'm so happy to be here. Thank you, Diana.
Thank you for listening to Medusa's Awakening podcast. Stay up to date on new episodes by following, liking, and subscribing to our pages. We are on Instagram at Medusas_awakening, on YouTube at Medusa's Awakening, and on TikTok at Awakening_Medusa_podcast.